Hello, my name is B.A. Paris and I'm the author of The Therapist, and I'm here to answer your questions today. So my first question was, what was your inspiration for The Therapist? And I think my inspiration for The Therapist was moving back to the UK from France into a cottage in a village in the countryside. And the neighbours were very friendly straight away, but I was aware that most of them had lived in the village for over 20 years and that a lot of friendships had already been established. And we were very much the newbies. And I used that experience for The Therapist. In The Therapist, Alice moves from the countryside into a gated residence in London with her partner of 18 months, Leo, so he's a relative new partner. And she's desperate to be accepted by her neighbours because, of course, when she lived in the countryside, in the village, she knew everyone. And they all seem very friendly until she starts asking about a murder which took place in the house that she had moved into. So then she realises lots of secrets and lies, and people don't want to talk to her. So that is basically the story of The Therapist. And my second question was, how do you come up with ideas for your novels? So I usually find myself in a situation and my imagination will run riot, and I'll think, what would I do if this happened now? So, for example, one day I was travelling through a wood in a storm, and I wondered what would happen if I saw someone who had broken down. And I thought, well, of course, I'd stop to help them. But then I thought, well, actually, would I? If it was a man, would I stop to offer help? And even if it was a woman, because I'd be worried if it was a trick. And then I wondered what would happen if I just drove on and the next day found that the woman had been murdered. So that gave me the idea for the breakdown. And for The Therapist, when I moved into the cottage where we live now, I began wondering about all the people who had lived here before, because the cottage is about 200 years old. Parts of it is anyway. And I thought, well, many generations have lived here. And I thought about the people that would have died in the cottage. And I was fine living with their ghosts, but I thought, what would I do if I found out that someone had been murdered here? And if it was quite recent. And I thought that was a brilliant start for a story. So this is what happens to Alice when she moves into her gated residence in London. My next question is, who would my dream dinner party guests be? So this sometimes changes, but I do kind of have a constant three, if they could be living or dead. Because my first on the list would be Oscar Wilde. I love his work and I would absolutely love to have dinner with him. I just think it would be amazing, his wit and just such an interesting character. And my second one would be Margaret Atwood, because I admire her so much. I love her novels and I just think she's great. So I definitely have Margaret Atwood. And the last, as I don't have to have authors because it doesn't say so in the question, so I think I would have Christoph Waltz, the actor, because I just love him as an actor. I've seen him in many films and I just think that he would be great. He's very charming. And the added advantage of having those three is that I would be the youngest one there. So that doesn't happen very often nowadays. So that would be quite good. And my next question, it's really interesting, this one. If I wasn't a writer, what would I be? I suppose if I hadn't started writing when I did, when I was 50, I would probably have carried on being a teacher. But I hope then that if I hadn't realised my dream of being a writer, I would have realised the other dream that I had, which has been, maybe I will still do it one day, I would love to own a second-hand bookshop with a tea room attached, because I absolutely love baking. I love baking cakes. I've been making them all my life for my daughters. And I've always wanted to have a tea room. So with a second-hand bookshop where people come in and sit on lovely, comfortable sofas and take a book and order tea and cake and just read the book and then take it home with them if they wanted to, and not bring it back or bring it back and replace it with another one. And I would love to do that. So who knows, maybe in a few years' time, in 10 years' time, if I ever get fed up of writing, or maybe I could do the writing at the same time. I don't know. But so hopefully I would have a tea room and a second-hand bookshop. My next question is, if I could travel anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go and why? Well, that's an easy one for me because it would be New Zealand. For lots of reasons. My daughters have been to New Zealand. We went to Australia last year with my husband, but we didn't have enough time to go to New Zealand. And it's somewhere I would really love to go because of the beautiful scenery. And also, my next book, I've set a part of it in New Zealand. So for me, going to New Zealand was going to be the opportunity to do some research. So at the moment, I've had to rely on Google Maps and things like that to find my way around and to base it in the areas that I've based the story in. But to give it more atmosphere, I would really like to go there and experience it for myself. So it would definitely be New Zealand. I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't go before my book is published or before it goes to print. So I'm still hoping that there'll be some way that they will open their borders to us. And my last question is, what am I reading right now? So right now I'm reading, so it is a thriller, but it's different because it's Daughters of Night by Laura Shepard Robinson. And I picked up this book because I just thought the cover was so beautiful. I was in Waterstones and the cover just drew me to it. And I hadn't read any of Laura's books. I think this is her second one. And what I love about it, it's a thriller set in a different era. So it's set in 18th century London, and she really brings it alive. And it's a period that's always fascinated me because I kind of have this romantic notion about what it must have been like to live in those days. But of course, the reality is that it was quite dirty. I mean, people didn't wash, and people wore wigs or they had their hair piled on their head and there were rats living in it. So, she really brings it to life. There's the glamorous part, but there's also the reality. And I've always enjoyed the books by Mick Finley, his Arrowwood series. And so they're a little bit reminiscent of that because he's also set a couple of 100 years ago in London. So that's what I'm reading now, and I'm really enjoying it and would recommend it if somebody wants a thriller with a little bit of difference.